Welcome to GRE. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Must rents crash? In times of high inflation, tenants are paying more for everything from food to gas to medical care. So don't rents have to go down? You'll get a complete answer to that question and some fascinating learning. Then we profile 3 exciting investor advantage real estate markets today on Get Rich Education. Mid-South homebuyers with over 2 decades as the nation's highest rated turnkey provider, their empathetic property managers use your return on investment as their North Star. It's no wonder smart investors line up to get their completely renovated income properties like it's the newest iPhone. Headquartered in Memphis with their globally attractive cash flows, Mid-South has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and 4,000 houses renovated. There is zero markup on maintenance, let that sink in, and they average a 98.9% occupancy rate with an industry-leading 3.5-year average renter term. Every home they offer you will have brand new components, a bumper-to-bumper 1-year warranty, new 30-year roofs, and wait for it, a high-quality renter in an astounding price range, $100,000 to $150,000. Get to know Mid-South. Enjoy cash flow from day one at midsouthhomebuyers.com. That's midsouthhomebuyers.com. If you're looking to grow your passive income from real estate, pay attention. My Property Stats is a deal analysis tool developed by an active investor to cut the time it takes to analyze any deal by over 90%. For any real estate class, you can calculate the exact price to pay to hit your cash flow and IRR goals. Build a world-class pro forma. Calculate the most you should pay for a renovation. Run multiple scenarios with a comparison tool and more. My Property Stats is the all-in-one toolkit for real estate investors. That means more deals, more cash flow, and more returns. Go to mypropertystats.com/GRE now and use the coupon code GRE to get 10% off your first year. That's just $90 a year for a tool that can save 10 hours per deal. No more spreadsheets, no more juggling multiple files. Use coupon code GRE to get 10% off at mypropertystats.com/GRE. You can get a 50-year-old house somewhere or buy a new one directly from the builder with tenant-resilient amenities already built in. With over 3,000 Florida units at different construction stages, they are exclusively for investors. President Wagner Nolasco and team also invest strongly in their own product. That's belief. Start at build2rentdirect.com. That's build the number 2 rentdirect.com or text 407-927-5074.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Hey, welcome to GRE. With 4.5 million listener downloads, you're tuned into one of America's longest running and most listened to shows on real estate investing. From Williamstown, Massachusetts to Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and across 188 nations worldwide, this is Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and I'm so appreciative with your devoted listenership. I am just truly blown away by it. I'm genuinely grateful for you. In times of high inflation, what happens to rents? Don't rent amounts have to crash, just totally collapse because renters are getting squeezed for higher costs of living on everything from food to medical care to gas. So then how could they possibly pay more for rent? And then also, wouldn't this create a crisis for rent collecting landlords that have their own set of mortgage and property operating expenses that they have to pay? Well, you're going to understand what happens to rents in high inflation, why it happens, and why it's totally opposite of what most people think. All right, now first, let's take a look at the depth of the problem here. Understand that the latest annual CPI inflation number reported at 8.2%. That number exceeded expectations, and most people feel that the real diminished purchasing power of the dollar is substantially higher than that, maybe double. So understand that inflation is entrenched. It's not going away. Electricity is up 16%. Airfares have spiked 43%. And you know what's even worse? The producer price index is soaring as well. The PPI, it tracks wholesale prices, and it's a more forward-looking inflation measure. That's what is ominous here, and that's what underscores why I say that inflation is entrenched. Consumer pocketbooks are being stretched. All right, well, wouldn't high inflation mean that your tenant gets squeezed and is going to have trouble paying the rent? I mean, any outcome other than that could seem as unlikely as the rise of pickleball. Once again, to get the answer to this question, I like to look at history over hunches. That's where you start. It is history over hunches. It's easy to have a hunch, but what really happens historically, that's something that's more telling. So let's look at history and then talk about the future of rents. In this case, you and I have to go back 40 plus years. That's when we last saw inflation at today's levels. So let's look at how rents moved in a high inflation environment back then. From 1974 to 1985, which is the last high inflation environment, rents increased 7% to 12% each and every one of those years. And I've got a chart for that linked in the show notes with credit to RealPage. Also, what's noteworthy about this 11-year period, again, 1974 to 1985, is that it's a period that included 3 separate economic downturns within that time. And that's important for our comparison today because a lot of people feel that a recession is imminent or that it's already here. And you know what? Rents are soaring again today, right now in America. Rents are increasing, in fact, multiples faster than average. But how? How could rents increase faster than historic norms? We've had high inflation for more than a year now. So the lag effects are now being accounted for as well. And after all, American wage growth, that's only been 5% in the past year. That 5% lags both the rate of inflation and rent increases. All right, so let's take a look at why and how this happens, why rents keep soaring today in this high inflation environment. History is largely repeating itself, and we'll look at how high rents are soaring today shortly. But first, let's look at how renters are paying more. Like I was talking about last week, are renters having to eat those plentiful free samples at Costco and turn that into their dinner? No, it's nothing like that. And it's got nothing to do with buy one, get one half off a frozen box of White Castle chicken sliders either. There are 3 reasons, why rents are rising fast despite high inflation and a possible recession today. Say that you want to hike the rent on your tenant today from $1,600 up to $1,800. That is a 12.5% increase, which, as you're going to see shortly, is about how much rents are up year over year today. The first reason why this can happen is because renters often move down a class, like I quickly mentioned last week. But let's break this down some more this week, because housing markets are not static. Some tenants will move from the best housing that they're currently in, Class A housing, where they're paying, say, $2,500 rent, down to Class B housing, a lesser grade of housing, in order to pay your $1,800 in rent, or they might even move from Class B to Class C. Sometimes that is where your tenant comes from. They come from a higher housing rung, if you will. And now maybe you're wondering, well, wait, wouldn't this make for a decreased quality of life for a tenant? A decreased standard of living for that resident if they move down a housing class? Yeah, it could. It makes for a more austere existence. Well, that's what happens in an economic downturn. And note that this is why, here at GRE, for long-term rentals, we generally avoid investing in the highest end of the market because in recessionary times, renters have to be able to step down from somewhere. So that's the first reason. The second reason that rents rise fast in high inflation is that more renters double up with roommates, especially now when housing supply is low. Now, understand something though. During the health crisis almost 3 years ago, the opposite occurred. There was this decoupling trend. In roommate situations, people broke up, but now as the health crisis has waned, I actually don't think that doubling up is going to become as popular as it might have been during that high inflation 40 years ago. I think doubling up is going to be more limited this time around, and that's because today, the work from home trend, that is embedded in society, and work from home, that means the need for more space. And that's why I don't expect this doubling up as roommates effect to be as strong as the last time that we had high inflation 40 years ago. It's a little bit like the Mark Twain quote, right? History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. Yeah, did you realize that quote that you probably heard a lot in your life is actually attributed to Mark Twain? It could be a case of that. There should be some more doubling up, but likely at a lower rate than you would have seen 40 plus years ago. The third reason that we're having high rent increases again during today's high inflation is low housing supply and high housing demand. Renters are bidding up rents. In some markets, renters desperate for housing are even offering gifts to prospective landlords. And with all of the major media negativity about buying primary residences, more people keep renting instead, people that either want to rent or have to rent. And to update the astounding dearth of supply, this paltry supply in the U.S. housing market, there is just not nearly enough housing to go around. The FRED data, it shows us that America's active listing count of homes, which has historically been more balanced when it was up at 1.5 to 2 million homes, well, that figure bottomed out at just an astounding 350,000 back in February. And it is up appreciably from there, but there are still just 730,000 housing units available as of September. So we have half or a little less than half of the supply of available homes needed to house America. And for consistency's sake, by the way, this is the same supply data set that I've discussed for a year or more for you now. So you can get that apples to apples comparison on the available supply of listed homes. So to review what you've learned so far today, they are the three reasons that rents are soaring again in high inflation today. Number one was moving down a class. Number two is doubling up. And number three is housing's low supply with high demand. Well, the result today, with recession fears and high inflation being entrenched for more than a year now, sure enough, here you go, the latest CoreLogic single-family rent index shows us that rents are up more than 12% annually. And for apartments, it is a similar 12%. That is per Zumper's apartment report. You know, since the inception of this show in 2014, you're really getting some testimony now these days to real estate's resilience over time, the stability that the asset class maintains. And during times of an economic downturn and high inflation, it's still often the best place for you to put new money. And if you don't, and it's just idling cash, you're losing perhaps 10% of your purchasing power every single year. So there is a high opportunity cost to staying put. Halloween is next week, and primary residence buyers are getting spooked about buying. Well, that is a boon to you because it drives up your rents. Hey, I've got some key insights on a fundamental GRE concept for you here. It's not history over hunches or some of those other concepts that originated right here, like financially free beats debt free, or the inflation triple crown, or even don't quit your daydream. It is that real estate pays 5 ways, the concept that I invented around 2015, and that is this. Real estate has exactly 5 main profit centers, no more and no fewer. In the past, a lot of people only stated the first 4, appreciation, cash flow, ROA, and taxes. And really, when I came to this field, I emphasized that it's not just appreciation, it's leveraged appreciation. And then I added the 5th one, the inflation profiting benefit that you get on the debt. But what's interesting is that I've had a couple professionals in the real estate field look at GRE's 5 ways and say, hey, I think it pays 6 ways. One posited that when the appraisal comes in higher than your contract sale price, you've got instant equity, and right there's your sixth way. No, that's not a sixth way. Though that can and does happen, it can't be counted on. It's not typical. And even if you were going to count it, maybe you'd add that return onto the first of five ways, appreciation. And then also a professional looked at the five ways and added that when for every dollar that rents rise, your cash flow might rise $2, when your leverage, counting that as a sixth way, well, although that is true, that really only increased the second of five ways that you're paid, cash flow. The benefit being discussed there, your cash flow increasing at a rate faster than your rental increase rate, that is accounted for in the inflation triple crown already, as any longtime GRE scholar knows. However, I appreciate some of you real estate professional listeners to the show out there asking about real estate pays five ways, and it is exactly five. And because of your questions like that, I'm able to give an explanation that allows these concepts to crystallize for every GRE listener. Coastal northeastern markets can be expensive. New York City, Boston, DC. Well, there's another set of metro markets in that general area, that northeastern quadrant of the nation, but it's a bit further west of those three cities, and it has investor advantage neighborhoods that we haven't discussed here in a few years. Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. Baltimore is barely considered coastal, though it may be on an estuary. Philly and Pittsburgh are clearly not coastal cities. A Pennsylvanian with a geography degree would know that. One attribute that these markets can offer you are an urban presence in your real estate portfolio. Yeah, owning properties with proximity to key infrastructure that you just can't get in some suburban places, as much as we favor investing in suburban places. When you go urban, you get better proximity to infrastructure that leads to a good quality of life that a lot of tenants and residents value. I'm talking about things from airports to bridges to major pro sports arenas and even to human capital. Yeah, human labor is infrastructure as well. And what about walkability? Well, unlike suburbia, you might be able to walk from your home to a store or restaurant when you're in an urban area, and that is deeply appealing to a lot of people. In fact, you might have heard of the walk score before. Redfin is credited for pioneering the walk score back in 2007, and that score is just how it sounds. Each particular address has a score, and that is rated on walkability to amenities. So as you're growing your portfolio, maybe you want to be in, say, 2 urban markets and 2 suburban markets, or 1 and 3, or whatever the right mix is for you. And in these more urban markets, you could be surprised at the low price points here. Hey, if you love the GRE podcast, tell a friend or family member about the show. I would really appreciate that. And if your friend or family member does not know about podcasts, and some people still don't, they can listen to the dedicated Get Rich Education mobile app for iOS and Android. Of course, that is free to listen to there. I'd really appreciate you telling a friend about the show here. Coming up straight ahead, how do you get 20% off investor advantage properties in 3 mid-Atlantic markets? I'm Keith Weinhold. This is Get Rich Education. Hey, my friend Damian Lupo informed me that checkbook IRAs have been made illegal by the U.S. tax court. If you have a checkbook IRA, your holdings are now disqualified with taxes and penalties up to 50%. But don't panic, Damian and the EQRP company can fix this. Those IRAs can be converted into EQRPs retroactive to last year, getting those tax deductions and reducing your taxable income. In this way, you can invest your 401k or IRA in real estate, Bitcoin, gold, and even your own business. So whether you're a full-time investor or retired or even a dentist with dozens of employees, if you're listening, you qualify, the EQRP works. It's a solution. You'll control your money, kill UBIT, and pay way less taxes. To learn more about this strategy and free up your retirement money, get the newest EQRP special report. Text GRE to 307-213-3475. That's text GRE to 307-213-3475. GRE listeners can't stop talking about their service from Ridge Lending Group and MLS 42056. They've provided our tribe with more loans than anyone. They're truly a top lender for beginners and veterans. It's where I go to get my own loans for single-family rental property up to 4plexes. So start your pre-qualification and you can chat with President Chaley Ridge personally. They'll even deliver your custom plan for growing your real estate portfolio. Start at ridgelendinggroup.com. Knowing the difference between a turnkey provider and a vertically integrated rental property company can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of your investment. Some companies sell you a property they don't own, renovate it with contractors they don't control, refer you to a property management company they don't manage, all in multiple markets because they can't source enough inventory. That's why truly passive investors work with our friends at JWB Real Estate Capital, perhaps the country's only vertically integrated rental property investment company. They operate in one market, Jacksonville, Florida, and their whole job is to make investing in rental properties easy for you. In fact, because of their vertically integrated approach, their clients have gained 79% more home price appreciation than the overall Jacksonville market since 2013. Find out more about why it pays to invest with JWB. Call them at 904-677-6777 or go to jwbrealestate.com/GRE.
This is Richard Duncan, publisher of Macro Watch. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Hey, well, I'd like to welcome someone I've done real estate business with for, perhaps 6 or 7 years now. Not only is he a pro that helps investors land occupied properties that produce income from day one, but he does this in some large markets that we haven't discussed here on the show in a while. Phil, welcome back to GRE.
Thanks very much, Keith. It's really a pleasure to be here and great to see you again.
Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. In fact, I just recently spent some time in these cities, older metros, properties that are not new build, yet we've got high rent to price ratios of 0.9% or more in these metros. I think of these metros as, okay, they're not growing as fast generally as, say, the metros in the Southeast. There are so many other exceptions and qualifiers, and real estate is such a local phenomena. So why don't you just in aggregate talk to us about the character generally of these three cities, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, as far as investor advantaged income property?
The character of the three markets is very interesting because 5 or 6 years ago, I think a lot of times we were looking at comparisons between pre-recession highs and current day. In fact, though, we've seen what happens often to be the case is that a market will resurge itself, if you will. Philadelphia 10 years ago was just hotter than Hades, and yet it cooled off and it approached that pre-recession high and exceeded it. But in fact, right now, Philadelphia has come back with a vengeance, and there are properties that are theoretically fair market value of X, and they're actually even appraising at X plus 10%, 20% or more. Pittsburgh, much the same thing. Again, as we know, and all of your listeners are well familiar, every market has its own cycle. Baltimore, though, isn't particularly intriguing as far as I'm concerned. It's gone through not only this resurgence, but it has maintained its strength in terms of rent-to-price ratios, in terms of high renters to owners. It is a fantastic feeder market, one of the best feeder markets that I'm aware of in the country with respect to Washington, D.C. A lot of mid-level bureaucrats who can't afford really to live in Washington will live in Baltimore. Why? Because after work, they get out, they hop on the train, and 40 minutes later, they're in Baltimore, which is a really lovely city. But it's not about the age or maturity of the city or even the nature of the product, which very often you're looking at row houses in Baltimore, row houses in Philadelphia. Less so in Pittsburgh, but still can find it. But it doesn't matter because old bones make for great opportunities.
row houses. So we're generally talking about single family homes that share a common wall. That's a term commonly used in the urban Northeast. And I have walked cash flowing row houses in, for example, West Philadelphia and Southwest Philadelphia, where you avoid the bad sections. Yet, for example, you don't want to get too close to Penn, the University of Pennsylvania. Otherwise, rent to price ratios don't work anymore. So real estate's very local. There are all these sweet spots. It's really interesting with what you brought up about Baltimore being maybe in some senses a bedroom community of Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. has a lot of stable jobs, government jobs, but yet the numbers don't work so well in D.C. So you can get a Baltimore resident potentially that has a D.C. job. And real estate's such a local phenomena. You know, we talk about metros in general, and some metros are growing faster than others, but we talk about what's important locally. For example, what if you buy a property in a metro that's population is stable and not growing very much, but yet you're in a medical sub-market and you have good proximity to medical jobs with that property that you bought? Well, nearly every metro in the United States, for example, the metro sub-market and that industry has grown faster than almost every other sector and is projected to continue to. So it has so much to do with the local flavor here. So, Phil, why don't you talk to us some more about the personality of these markets, or maybe potentially focusing on Baltimore since you see good opportunities there right now?
Well, you have a lot of major industry that Under Armour is in Baltimore, but you do have Johns Hopkins University and a big medical and medical research community. Again, the proximity to our nation's capital really sets the tone in a lot of ways for Baltimore in terms of the complexion of the population. Let's not try and hide anything under the carpet, but a lot of people ask me often about that series that was on one of the cable channels, The Wire. And, you know, I'm here to say that I even watched it with interest and tried and was successful a little bit in finding some of those really incredible neighborhoods. That's not obviously where we're investing. We are going after, I have the benefit of almost 2 decades in this industry. And so as such, I look at how it was 10 years ago or more, and the fact that you always looked for a certain profile in terms of a market. And you wanted a market where you could have properties in, you know, solid B neighborhoods and 8% or higher cap rates. Well, that's changed in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
In Baltimore, for example, where you want to be is in the C plus, maybe B minus neighborhoods. They have on average 9% annual returns. So it's super solid. What contributes to that, Keith, is relatively low purchase prices. The average of what we work with is basically between 100 and 120,000. And yet the rents are, again, fueled in large part by the proximity to Washington, are real world rents today. That's what we bring to the table as a table setting. In terms of our offer, however, we have a program that I've never found anywhere else in the country now or in the last 10 or 15, 20 years. It's, I think, a game changer.
Under Armour is in Baltimore. Personally, I'm more of a Nike guy. That clothing just seems to fit my body better for workouts, but that doesn't really have so much to do with cash flowing real estate. But one thing that does is you mentioned 9% returns. Which return are you referring to? There are so many returns in real estate.
Basically, cap rate. The only thing is sometimes we don't always put in, as I have sometimes in the past, contingency expenses in the cap rate calculation for vacancy and repairs. We have, however, fully renovated every property, fully tenanted the property. And when we talk about the returns, we take the rent less the direct expenses, the monthly proportion of real estate taxes, for a monthly proportion for insurance, the property management fee. And you end up with your net operating income for a month. You multiply it by 12 to get an annual figure, and then you divide it simply by the price of the property. Not the closing cost, nothing to do with leverage if you're using financing, just by the purchase price of the property. And that percentage is what we refer to as annual return. And what we see is, sure, we've got some properties that are just under 8%, but the overwhelming majority are 9% and up, some even at or above 10%.
The cap rate, the annual net operating income divided by the purchase price. Our audience thinks more in the rent to price ratio. Like I stated earlier, that 0.9% or more per month. That would mean
I'd say
$900 a monthly rent, for example, for a 100K property.
I see on average at or above 1%.
Yeah, okay, that's excellent. That's really competitive in today's market, even with higher interest rates.
As you well know, Keith, in this business, the old model used to be that you'd pick out a property that you liked, and then you'd reserve it. You'd have it inspected. You get the inspection report back, and it's a 4-letter word, every inspection report. And that word is ugly. And the seller would do their best to renovate that property. And you might even have it inspected again. When you get that all done and it's considered in good shape, if you're financing it, then your lender does an appraisal. And you hope, oh, please let it appraise. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Then comes, okay, we're past that, and now we've got to find a good tenant. Well, you don't really have a lot of history there, do you? So you bring in the tenant and cross your fingers and hope that they're okay. We looked at all of this and we said, there's got to be a better way. We know what that way is. So every property that we offer, and frankly, Keith, we have over 100 available properties in Baltimore alone.
Great.
Yeah. We buy the properties. We renovate them to what we call a rental standard. We don't spend any more money than is necessary to get a good tenant in there at a good rent because it's just wasted money. There's no point. To a good rental standard. We have the property inspected by a third-party inspector. It doesn't mean that the buyer can't do the same. That's perfectly fine if they want to do. But we also obtain the rental license, the lead certification. We have a desktop appraisal performed on the property, which can't be used for lending purposes, but it does give a confidence in terms of the value. Here's the absolute kicker. We have the before and after photos and all that stuff. That's great. But we actually will give a buyer access to the owner's portal with the property management. They can go in and see the tenant's background and tenant ledger payment history before they even buy.
This is super helpful to a prospective buyer. So first of all, before that buyer buys a property, they have a desktop appraisal. Okay, that's not going to be able to be used for financing, but that does give you some idea on, is it a fair market value that you're buying the property for? You talk about having an inspection in hand already, a recent inspection report, and access to the tenant's rent payment history.
All of that is correct, but the bottom line is, then it comes to pricing our properties. We price our properties 20% under fair market value.
Now, some might wonder, well, why would you do that? Or how could you do that in today's market? For one thing, I happen to know that you don't have any broker or agent fees. I mean, buying properties in this way is a direct model, but tell us about that 20% discount and the what's and whys behind that, Phil.
If you got a fair deal somewhere, let's say we're going to go out and buy a lawnmower, you could pay the suggested retail price, say it's $300. But then you found a quality retailer who wanted your business whenever you were going to buy a lawnmower, and they offered that same lawnmower for $240 and a pat on the back. Where are you going to do your shopping next time you want a lawnmower? That's the approach we take. Look, we believe that a fair price creates customers for life. We find that buyers that we work with aren't visiting or working with us because they want to buy one property.
Right.
They have a long-term plan, and we're all about helping investors build a quality portfolio. I happen to know that your clients, you and I have known each other for a long time, are probably amongst the best, most educated, and serious investors on the planet, bar none. And that's just the kind of person who we know when they see the value, they're going to come back again and again. They won't do that if we've abused them on price and taken advantage on a one-off.
See, and this is where income property is different than, say, an agent that's selling to a homeowner that wants to buy a primary residence that might only buy a property every 7 years. Well, that agent isn't incentivized to try to get a discount, or that seller isn't incentivized to try to give a discount to that buyer that 7 years from now, they're probably not going to be back to do repeat business with them. But you are different. You're an investor that's often buying multiple properties per year. So it does make sense sense to give some volume discount for some loyalty that way. Phil, are there any other things that we should know about these properties in this program that you have that makes it really easy and approachable for people to buy in these mid-Atlantic markets?
Couple of quick things, Keith. Number one is we encourage and invite prospective investors to do their own inspection. Many like to do that. We understand that. No problem with that at all. Happy to have them do that. All of our properties, oftentimes people who will come close to what we do insist upon an all-cash purchase. That's not our thing. We recognize that actually leverage can be probably one of your best friends in this environment. So every one of our properties is available to be financed. Here's the thing that we love. We love to have people come into our house and see what we've got going on. We are happy to welcome any and all who want to come visit the market. We'll spend time with them. We'll show them the market, show them some properties. And the cool thing, as I said before, is we have so many properties that are available. I happen to believe if you can't find a property that meets your needs for your portfolio, you're either not serious about buying. I don't even want to think of the alternative.
Yeah, so if you like, come and do a tour of these properties in the markets that we're talking about today. To Phil's point, the recent inspection that they give you access to before you buy, you might just want to take that as a piece of information before you move ahead. And then once you're under contract, sure, go ahead and get that independent third-party inspection yourself. I recommend that even on new build properties, and I do on these ones just the same. That's really cheap insurance for you. So if you want to learn more about these properties and get started and see if it's right for you, you can do that at our GRE Marketplace, and that's at gremarketplace.com/coach. That's where our in-house coach here at GRE, Naresh, can help get you started with these properties and show you what your options are. And Naresh's coaching is completely free, so you get started with these particular properties in Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh at gremarketplace.com/coach. Phil, I think this is really going to help a lot of people in some markets that we don't talk about too often. Do you have any last thoughts about a buyer in these mid-Atlantic markets?
I think they've stood the test of time, Keith. As I said, I have the benefit of perspective of over a decade dealing in these markets, and they are a bit out of step. But again, the age of the row houses, albeit in good condition, you don't have a lot of the expensive prospective CapEx expenses that you might have, roof and HVAC and all that kind of thing in some other markets. Why? Because a row house has a flat roof. And if anything happens to it, I mean, we don't sell a house with a roof in bad condition. But if the roof were to go, you're looking at $4,000 to have it replaced. It's not some egregious amount. These markets are exciting because they not only are driven by a strong local population, but in the case of Baltimore, bedroom community, Pittsburgh, very vibrant community. I mean, you're familiar with all of these being from Pennsylvania as you are, but I've seen a couple of cycles now, and I feel very good about the prospect going forward for all of these markets. Strong cycles ahead. It doesn't really matter in my thinking, Keith, about high interest rates and high inflation. After all, what's one of the 5 profit centers of owning real estate? An inflation hedge. You borrow today's dollars and pay back with lesser value tomorrow dollars. Isn't it a wash a little bit in the big picture?
Somewhat, yes. And one can even be up since the tenant pays that entire interest payment for you, of course, in income property. But yes, indeed, that inflation profiting benefit, that 5th of 5 ways that real estate pays. So we're talking about, again, price points between 100 and 120K for an attached, not detached, but often attached single family home. Oftentimes these row homes are 2 and sometimes 3 stories, Phil.
Yeah, generally they're 2 stories. Plus a basement. Basement is rarely finished. Something that people, I think, should wrap their brain around is that the overwhelming majority are 3-bed, 1-bath. I've had a lot of people ask me over the years, well, geez, I'd really like to see a half bath, maybe in the basement area or something like that. Now, I have 2 ways of responding. If the person has been a bit of a jerk, I'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were planning on living there. Which is, of course, not the case. But no, seriously, It does not have any negative impact on the value or resale of the property. It's normal for that type of thing. But we can, to that point or question, we can put one in if somebody really wanted to. I mean, it's like around $4,000 to do. We're happy to show anybody a lot of the investor advantaged areas where we're investing in Baltimore. These are mostly, like I said, C plus, B minus neighborhoods. In Philly, we've got a long-standing footprint there and can introduce, and we know the city intimately well. Again, C plus, B minus, even some B in upper areas, but the prices are higher and the caps are a little lower. I think all of these markets are just super strong. They have resiliency, Keith.
We're talking about generally bigger markets, especially Philadelphia. Then there's Pittsburgh and Baltimore. And what's interesting is you, the listener, the viewer here, you may very well live in one of these markets. And even if you live in one of these markets, oftentimes you will find it surprising to see just where that investor advantage sweet spot is and why those properties make sense, often on the other side of a metro from where you live. And Phil's made available tours. If you do indeed want to do that, these could potentially be good properties for you if you're starting out in real estate investing too. And I really encourage you to act. The best investors continue to put property in their portfolio and don't try to get the timing just right on the market. And they don't postpone things. I mean, for example, in 2020, maybe someone could say, well, I'm just going to wait and see because there's a health crisis. And then in 2021, maybe someone said, well, I'm going to wait and see because I know that supply is really low and it's kind of a frenzied housing market. Then in 2022, they say, well, I don't know. I hear that a recession's coming. And that type of person in 2023, you know what? They're going to say, oh, well, there's some other reason why I'm going to postpone getting started. Well, the best investors let real estate pays 5 ways work for them over time. And that's what you can do here. So if that's where you're at, I really encourage you to act and get started on a property. You can't make any money from the property that you don't own. So get started at gremarketplace.com/coach. Again, Naresh is there for free to help make it easy for you. Phil, it's been great talking about some of these markets that are really in my original stomping grounds. Thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
I really enjoyed being here, Keith. Thank you. You're a gentleman.
Hey, yeah, did you hear that? Phil says that you are among the best, most educated, and serious investors anywhere. And he runs a program that you don't just find everywhere. An inspection and desktop appraisal is done before you make an offer. That gives you confidence and saves you time. Even if you decide to get your own inspection done after your contract, imagine how that inspection list is going to be shorter. Therefore, repairs can be done faster since there was a pre-contract property inspection already done. And then that the tenant has already been placed for you and you get to see that tenant's history of rent payments before you buy the property. And you know, one good way for you to gauge neighborhood quality, which is a really important measure, is what quality of tenant can you attract to a neighborhood and property that you consider buying. Well, how do you know what quality tenant you could attract? Well, you've got the proof. You've got the profile of the tenant that already resides there. And then Naresh here at GRE is particularly personally familiar with Baltimore. He used to live there. And again, his coaching is free. So a lot of stars could be in alignment here for helping you get started in any of these 3 markets. And again, you can do that there on our marketplace at gremarketplace.com/coach. Until next week, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.